But to begin with, our roundup of what's gone on in politics in the last week or so, as we do every Friday in the program. And to that end, pleased to welcome back to the program John Best, the publisher of the Bay Observer. John, I hope you're doing well these days. Thanks for being with us today.
Doing great, Bill. Nice to be with you.
Let me, right off the top, ask about what's going on with municipal government. We had some speculation earlier in this week, of course, when the NDP, who are still the official opposition to the Ontario legislature, of course, after the last election, but not with Andrea Horwath as leader, Peter Tabuns as the interim leader, but he named his shadow cabinet for all intents and purposes, and Andrea Horwath was in there she's in charge of integrity. I can't remember the exact title. I haven't got it in front of me, but that led to speculation that, wait a second, we thought she was running for mayor. Why would she accept a post like that? Is it much ado about nothing? Does she still have an escape clause there? What's your read on what you saw?
I think it's the latter. I think it's an escape clause. It is a bit unusual, though, for I'm trying to remember whether Kathleen Wynne, even though they were diminished to 7 or 8 seats, I'm trying to remember whether she actually took on a formal critic role. And in her case, of course, her intention was to remain in the legislature, even though she wasn't leader. Yeah. It seems to me that it does send out a bit of a mixed message, that it kind of suggests she's settling into the caucus duties. But let's face it, a critic role, especially the one she had, which is integrity, and I forget what the other part of it was, but there's obviously no ministry with that name. So it's not like she's paired off with health or education or one of the real ministries. It sounds like kind of a free-floating sort of an assignment. So I suppose that does leave open the opportunity that if she ends up running in Hamilton, the transition is not going to be very difficult. But let's face it.
Integrity and transparency, and I understand because it's not often you see those two words affiliated with politics. But anyway, but that just seems to be, as you say, kind of a made-up thing, and who knows what's going to happen. Could it be? Exactly. Because we got a lot of I got a lot of response after our conversation about this earlier in the week. Some are suggesting that, you know what, maybe she's dipped her toe in the water and found out that it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's pretty hard to raise money these days for politicians, especially not from a party standpoint, but even from an individual standpoint.
Well, I heard your conversation with Vito Scro yesterday, yeah. and I think he's got it right. It's getting more and more difficult to get people engaged in actual involvement in politics. We saw the terrible turnout in the last provincial election. And when you talk about trying to get people engaged, there's nothing more engaging than writing a check. And, if engagement is off at the voter level, it's probably equally off at the donation level. And running for mayor in Hamilton is an expensive proposition, unless you're an incumbent, like Fred Eisenberger was in the last election. He could get away with a less expensive campaign. But when it's a wide open field the way it is now, you need to be able to reach the voters, and that essentially translates into money. And I don't know who the donors are. You wouldn't expect someone who was recently an NDP leader to be getting any support from the development community. They definitely don't go in that direction normally. If you're looking at it from an LRT lens, Keenan Loomis has championed the LRT for half a decade now. So, the people that are wanting to see that come to fruition are going to park their vote there, I would think. So, where is the money? Maybe $300,000 possibly that it would take to mount a campaign.
Well, the other thing from a political standpoint, forget about the financials for a second, although that doesn't mean it's not important, because it certainly is. If somebody like an Andrea Horwath, who's a former leader of the provincial party, wanted to jump in there, how does she separate herself? In other words, what's she bringing to the table that the candidates who are already registered don't already have covered? You've got to be something different. You can't just work on name recognition and say, I want the job.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, she's obviously someone who is very familiar to Hamiltonians. She served on council before she became the party leader. She's had no trouble getting elected in her own riding in central Hamilton, lower Hamilton. I guess the question is, how well is she known in that horseshoe of Hamilton that tends to get ignored? This city is so obsessed with downtown issues that we forget that there's this great big horseshoe of 4 or 5 provincial and federal ridings, and probably 10 of the 15 wards are not that part of Hamilton where she has the most familiarity. So yeah, it's a difficult task to sort of jump in and say, well, you know me well, but I'm not sure what I have to, what is she going to say that we haven't heard already, I guess, would be the real question.
I mean, it's speculative at this stage, but I just find it interesting because that seemed to be the way things were going, and I think that speculation ramped up after Fred Eisenberger announced he wasn't going to run. We thought there was a void there, but maybe not. Just one last thing on municipal politics, John, because I want to talk about your reaction to a couple of surveys done federally. Are you surprised? I mean, we're still a couple of months away from the municipal elections here. I was just perusing the City of Hamilton webpage earlier this morning. A lot of people have registered to run in this election. And I know there are some incumbents who aren't running, so there are going to be some vacancies. We get that. But I don't know that I've seen this many people jumping in here. Do you read anything into that? Is it discontent? Is it just an opportunity for them to get into that horseshoe there at City Hall? What do you read into that?
Well, I think it's still there are a large number of people who have registered, but I still think if you look at the 4 the 4 wards where there is change, where the incumbent is not running, that's where the bulk of those new faces are. There's a couple of people taking a look at Ward 14 and wondering whether Terry Whitehead is going to run again. I think there's no question there's a group of people in town that are really focused on anybody but the incumbents. And if you look at who's registering, a lot of them are people that have been active with that group. So it doesn't necessarily point to an overwhelming groundswell across the city. It's some of the activists who have been in the, supporting groups like I-Elect and others are also, or, some of the anti-police groups, they're registering. So I don't know that there's certainly a lot of new names popping up on these nomination lists, but I'm not sure that it necessarily represents any kind of a movement.
Interesting to see how that's going to develop over the next little while. Speaking of elections, let's talk federally a second. I'm sure you've seen the marketing poll that was done for Post Media from the Leger folks. The headline is rather disturbing, I guess, if you're a Liberal supporter. Most Canadians disapprove of Justin Trudeau's performance as Prime Minister and feel that he is a divisive leader, with almost as many hoping he resigns before the next election, according to this new survey that was done for the folks at Leger Marketing. Not the sort of stuff you want to read when you're in a minority government and an election could happen at any time.
This is a devastating poll, Bill, in many ways. I mean, when you're talking, we talk about Joe Biden being in trouble when he's in the high 30s. I mean, we're talking Justin Trudeau here. He's got 55% either strongly disapprove or somewhat disapprove. Only 7% strongly approve. I mean, his numbers are as bad or worse than Biden. This is a bad poll, not only for the Liberals, but I think it's a bad poll for Canada, because if there's that much discontent with the government in power, voters may vote for somebody like Pierre Poilievre out of sheer frustration, even though he's, I think he scares a certain amount of the moderates in Canada. This is a really bad poll for the country, I think, because it once again shows that there's simply no place for politically in the political spectrum. There's no place for what you might call a moderate centrist voter. There's just no parking spot for that point of view anymore.
Well, I mean, Trudeau's won 3 elections. Of course, one in 2015, the big majority government, and 2 minorities since then. And some pundits, as we've talked about, John, have still suggested, look, he dodged the bullet in those last two where he won, simply because the Conservatives had a lackluster leader and didn't quite know what their message was, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't hang your hat on that every election. At some point, you've got to have something going for you. And I'm not suggesting there's going to be an election anytime soon. I saw one speculative piece in the Ottawa Citizen, I think, that said that Trudeau may pull the plug and call an election this fall. I don't think that's going to happen. But there's no succession plan here. We assume Chrystia Freeland would run for the leadership, but there'll probably be others. But he's not stepping down and showing no indication that he is. And it's as you say, it's very troubling for him and for the country as well. I mean, we've just come through 2.5 years of hell with COVID and all of the collateral damage that's resulted from that. And we're not very positive about things in this country right now, and that's disturbing.
No, and then you get the airport chaos. You've got a nation that desperately wants to travel after 2 years of lockdown. The system can't handle it. It's being blamed on the government, mainly because of their COVID airport testing restrictions and, all that stuff. I guess the other thing that I think is playing a role here, at least in my mind, this coalition that he formed with Jagmeet Singh, it may have saved his bacon as far as a parliamentary working majority goes, but I think it's further alienated voters. And I think this poll from the National Post, I think it's showing how the public has reacted to that whole piece of an NDP Liberal alliance. It's really created a situation where people just feel that they're disenfranchised. And the irony in that poll, by the way, is that Trudeau is not popular with the NDP and Greens, so it would tell Jagmeet Singh that maybe he made a mistake as well. So it's just a bad news poll that I think it shows that there's just a lot of churn and disconnect in the country. And when that happens, I think you do sometimes run the risk of getting an alternative that you wish you didn't have. And with the Conservative Party in, somewhat disarray, there you go. We could see a very nasty election in a couple of years.
Well, there's a couple of elements to that. And does Jagmeet Singh start to have second thoughts, if he hasn't already, about this alliance and think maybe I'll pull my support and that throws us into an election? That's a possibility. But the other is something that I know you've written about for many elections now, is when voters are angry, they tend to go to the polar opposite. And they did this certainly when they didn't like the Bob Rae government in Ontario back in the mid-'90s. And they went with Mike Harris and the Common Sense Revolution. And we all know how that ended. And there was a lot of voter remorse. I guess you could make the same basic argument about when they dumped Kathleen Wynne, too, and they went to an unproven guy named Doug Ford that didn't know. We didn't know much about him, and he didn't know much about provincial politics, but they just figured, what the hell's got to be better than what we've got? Are we developing that attitude now?
I think we are, Bill. You've got a combination of events. We haven't talked about it yet, but we have also from the National Post this poll that shows that Poilievre is now way out in front in terms of Conservative voters, how they feel. He's got a commanding lead over the others, like Jean Charest, only 14%, and he's got 48%. So if it ends up that the Conservatives take Pierre Poilievre, we're now in exactly the same situation as we were with those two elections you just mentioned. The Conservative leader is somebody who people are a bit scared of, but they're so fed up with the government they have that they take the leap of faith. It worked, I think you would say it worked with Ford because he ended up being quite a different character than people thought he was going to be. I heard your comment this morning. Probably didn't work as well with Harris, who really did go in and slash and burn and do pretty much what he said he was going to do. But it makes it more likely that a person that we might consider an extremist on the Conservative side could end up becoming Prime Minister.
Strange things going on these days. As always, John, thanks so much for this. Have a great weekend, and look forward to our conversations going forward.
My pleasure, Bill.
Take care. John Best, publisher of the Bay Observer.